Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 3 Millions Young Europeans Network webinar on citizenship. We have people joining on Zoom as well as on the Facebook live stream. So, welcome everyone to the webinar. My name is Alexandra. I am the Young Europeans Network Manager at the 3 Million. I'm co chairing the Young European meetings with Lara, who is on the panel as well today. And today we'll be discussing about an important topic for a lot of people, especially young people in the UK, but EU citizens in general, is what happens after settled status in a way, what happens with citizenship policy in the UK, what is the situation at the moment, how can we work together to have a more positive vision on citizenship, and many, many other questions that you sent to us in advance of today. Before we start the program for today, just a few housekeeping rules for people joining on Zoom, and then a few words for those on Facebook as well. So the webinar is live streamed on the 3 Millions Facebook page. So if you have some friends who perhaps didn't manage to register on the Zoom webinar, you can send them the link to our Facebook page to watch live as well there. Um, there are two types of chat on this Zoom webinar. The first is the Q&A function. So if you have a specific question during our speeches and during the panel interventions from 7 to 7:30, we'll have a whole half an hour for Q&A, where I will select some of your questions from the Q&A function, and I will ask the panelists, and we'll have some volunteers as well from the Young Europeans Network on those chats who will answer some questions in writing as well, because we won't be able to go through every single question, but we'll aim to respond to as many as possible, either through the panel, but also through from the volunteers on the chat. And then on the other chat here, you can add on Zoom, you can add comments, as well as on Facebook. If you're watching live on Facebook, feel free to add comments below the post with this live video so we can see and read some of your comments during the session as well. In the Q&A session, we'll also have an intervention from our colleague Luke Piper, who is with us today and who will give you an update on the CSI issue, because we got a lot of questions about the comprehensive sickness insurance, and we are not necessarily here today to discuss very specific legal details, but Luke will provide this overview around where the issue is at the moment and what could be done on the CSI issue more specifically. I'll be chairing this event throughout the panel and then the Q&A as well. And I'm really happy to see so many people attending on both Zoom and Facebook today, because citizenship is something that's really, it's a campaign that's really close to my heart. I recently became a British Romanian citizen. My recent citizenship is a British citizen. I'm Romanian born, and I actually got this passport, which is, you can judge whether it's blue or black. So we'll have this debate later on in the panel as well, whether the new passports are blue or black, and how can we make this experience that I had a bit easier for young people in this country and EU citizens more broadly. So put your comments. I already see Elsie in the chat saying it's blue. Anyone else wants to argue otherwise, feel free to put the comments on the chat or on the Facebook live stream. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Nicholas Hatton, who's the CEO of the 3 Million, to say a few words to begin this webinar, and then we'll start with the program, with the campaign, and then the panel discussion. So Nicholas, over to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for all the viewers now and in the future when you can watch it again on the Facebook. Citizenship, when we are born, we come into a family, and one of the first gifts to us is a citizenship. It's not something we choose, and I think most of us won't give it much of a thought throughout our lives. It's something that we live, it's something we feel. We feel the love for our nation. We feel a sense of belonging to a community of fellow citizens, and it gives us a set of values which forms the core of our identity. Yet some of us, me included, and many of the people watching today, we've moved from our place of birth to another country, and it does change our core values, our identity. With the 3 Million, we have this message, this is our home. And I think many immigrants will tell the story how they fell in love with the country they elected because that's a choice. And the values of that country, of that host country, have become part of their own identity. So somehow, the naturalization process is the final step in that is the final step in that process. It officializes the transition of an individual from being a third country national to become a citizen of this country they elected. And so, that's, for me, it's a very personal experience, and I think that's what I try to convey. Historically, when we look at the wave of migration before e-citizens, we're obviously talking about the Commonwealth citizens. And many of them who settled after the Second World War have become British. And it's very likely that the same pattern will emerge with EU citizens. Some of the data is showing that is starting or is started. But, there are barriers. It's not easy. And I think the question that begs really is that are these barriers the natural requirements for us to become British? Is it in the spirit as it was intended? Or actually, should we try to inform our British friends that they should be removed? So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. And I think it's very much, the first webinar on the subject, but definitely not the last one. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nicolas. So before we go on to explaining a bit more about why this campaign, why now, and what we're actually campaigning on, I'll share a very short video that we did as the Young Europeans Network about this campaign. So I hope people can see this on their screen, and I will start the video now. I arrived in the UK when I was 18 years old, and a bit over 8 years later, last month, I had my British citizenship ceremony, and I got this lovely picture of me over here with my naturalization certificate, which makes one officially British, and with a picture of the Queen.
I really want to become a British citizen, but I'm afraid of applying because I think they will reject me because I didn't have comprehensive sickness insurance while at university. Something no one ever told me about.
Like many young people, I live paycheck to paycheck, and I still live at home with my family. I see my future in the UK, and I really want to apply for British citizenship, but I just can't save enough money. The application fee alone is $1,330, and that's not even including the extra fees. This means that the real cost of citizenship is $1,549.20, which is way beyond what I could afford. I wish that everyone who wants to become British, like I did, can do so without unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles and forking out a fortune for it.
We have made many contributions. We are active in our local communities. We are a part of this country. Many young people like us want to become citizens, but the pathway to citizenship is not very straightforward. For starters, the application fee puts off many young people from becoming British. For naturalization as a British citizen, the route most of us take, the fee is £1,330. It only costs about £400 to process the application.
Citizenship is good for young people and good for the country. It is about rights and security. It is good for the economy and our communities. Yet, we have a long, costly, and bureaucratic process for citizenship. What we are missing is a vision for the future of British citizenship, a citizenship that is inclusive and positive. Because if we indeed want to build a global Britain needs global Brits.
Okay, so that was a Young Europeans campaign video. I hope you enjoyed watching that, and a few of the people in the video are actually with us today, and I can tell you more about their experience, including Lara. And actually, next up is Lara, who is the co-chair of the Young Europeans Network meetings, who will tell you a bit more about our campaign. And whilst Lara starts speaking, I also put a poll on the screen, which is for the EU citizens here in the Zoom audience, asking you about how you feel about this whole idea around British citizenship. So you have this poll pop up on the screen as well. Unfortunately, you can't see it on the Facebook Live, but you can also write in your comments in the comment section on the Facebook Live how you feel about citizenship, whether you applied, whether you already became British, whether you don't plan to apply, and why, so we can hear some more views from the public. So, Lara, over to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Yeah, so my name's Lara. I am the co-chair of the Young Europeans Network, and we're really excited to be launching a campaign. Oh, sorry, the poll popped up. We're really excited to be launching a campaign asking for British citizenship to become more accessible to non-UK nationals. We noticed that many of our members within the Young Europeans Network had a particular interest in this issue because many of them want to become British themselves for many reasons. Some are ready to make the application right now, and others are considering it for the future. But regardless of the reasons for people's interest in applying, we're all in agreement that naturalization applications are simply out of reach to many of us. The number one reason is the cost of the application itself. It costs £1,330 to apply, and that doesn't even include the many additional costs attached to it. Secondly, there are additional barriers to citizenship, like the comprehensive sickness insurance requirement on EU students or self-sufficient people. This affects young people in particular. There are also barriers associated with the complicated tests, such as the Life in the UK test, and also with dual nationality rules, as some countries, such as Austria, do not allow for dual nationality. We believe that access to British citizenship is an issue that affects EU and non-EU nationals, and it's really important for us to work together with charities in the migration sector, as we're doing today, politicians and volunteers, to achieve a more positive vision of citizenship, one that's not based on the government's hostile environment approach to immigration, but one that promotes citizenship, inclusion, and rights for migrants in the UK. But firstly, let me cover some of the reasons why people would like to become British citizens. Most of you watching this today will have your own personal reasons for thinking about citizenship. But generally, migrants in the UK want to become British citizens because, well, number one, to give them a sense of belonging. After having spent years in the UK, having studied and worked here, made new friends, learned many things about British culture and history, many consider the UK their home and don't think about returning to their original country. Becoming a British citizen, therefore, lets them assert themselves as a member of the UK, meaning that their citizenship identity now matches their legal status. And I think we can really understand the appeal of that. I think there's also a practical reason, as in that many consider citizenship as the next step in their migration journey in the UK. If they're entitled to citizenship, they will apply for it to solidify their status as a resident in the UK. As a practical point, I would also say that citizenship is about acquiring rights, such as the right to vote in national elections and referendums. So it's a positive step in the migration journey. Thirdly, is probably the most relevant reason that people want to apply for British citizenship because citizenship is the only status which provides people with full security in the UK. This has many links to the hostile environment and it needs to be explored further. But for EU nationals, for example, many don't believe that their settled status will be enough to protect them in the UK in the future. They fear that settled status could be taken away from them, which would take away their right to education, work, and residence in the UK. For non-EU nationals, similarly, applying for visa renewals, which could easily be rejected at any point and could put an end to their residence in the UK, can only come to an end when they receive a full status of citizenship, which offers official protection in the UK. Unfortunately, therefore, the pursuit of citizenship to many is not for positive reasons. It's embedded in fear of what will happen to them without it. And that is, of course, not an irrational fear, considering how the hostile environment treats migrants and what we have seen happen to the Windrush generation. So that idea that the Home Office can't be trusted is a serious consideration to many people. So through this understanding of why migrants in the UK want to become British citizens, our campaign calls on the government to make citizenship easier. That is our key aim. And there are many ways this can be achieved because there are many barriers in place. And our speakers will cover them in more detail. But generally, reducing the cost or providing people with application loans or reducing the fees based on someone's income could be a start. Removing the comprehensive sickness insurance requirement would definitely help. And providing people with free legal advice if they need it would be vital for many. And the cost point is really important in our campaign because it's a common denominator for both EU and non-EU nationals, even though, unfortunately, non-EU nationals incur much higher costs through their immigration journey in the UK. But the most shocking aspect of the fact that a naturalization application costs £1,330 is that, one, it's one of the most expensive applications in comparison to other countries. And Pau will talk about this in more detail. But interestingly, it also costs the Home Office less than £400 to process an application, meaning that there's a huge profit of £900 to be made on top of every single application. And this doesn't even begin to cover the amount of money non-EU nationals have to pay for visa applications. It can cost more than £8,000 in application fees for limited leave for non-EU nationals before they can even think about applying for citizenship. We don't believe that this is a fair process, and we believe that we can have a better, more accessible vision of citizenship in the UK. Today, we'll be learning more about the barriers to citizenship, but in the future, as our campaign progresses, we want to make a positive case for more accessible citizenship. We want to send a message that citizenship should be promoted because it's about rights and duties. We're not only asking for more protection, we're also showing our commitment to the UK. We want to vote and we want to be recognized as a full member of the community we call home. Home Office research itself has talked about how citizenship can promote integration. And we know that integration is important to the government. So we're telling them that there's an easy way to achieve that. They just have to make it more accessible. And we believe also that citizenship can attract more skilled workers to the country as they have more freedom of coming and going without the obstacle of losing their status if they spend more time than they should out of the country. We know that we'll face some barriers in raising this idea to make citizenship more accessible. We often hear the argument that citizenship applications should be expensive because it reflects the value of being a citizen of the UK. We'll challenge that by saying that the value of citizenship should not be about money. It should be about people being a part of the UK. We wouldn't say that US citizenship, for example, is less valuable, even though it costs a third of what the UK citizenship application costs. And also, precisely because British citizenship is so treasured, it shouldn't be about financial access. It has to be about more than that. By having the cost so high, we're depriving those that have worked hard, have learned English, contributed years of income tax, possibly the key workers that have supported Britain during the pandemic, but just don't quite have enough money to apply for citizenship themselves as it's so expensive. The Home Office have repeatedly mentioned that citizenship is a privilege, not a right. If that is the case, then why are honest, hard-working residents being denied the chance because of cost? The Young Europeans Network will be working hard on making these arguments, and we will need your help in taking action. But I hope that today you learn a lot so that we can continue moving forward, creating a case for positive citizenship, so that we can support all migrants who want to secure their status in the UK, or simply want to become British because they want to. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lara, for this campaign overview. And I think what really is shocking, you know, in our cases is that, you know, myself and Lara lived in Cambridge, both went to Cambridge University, both had quite similar lives, being involved in local politics here in Cambridge and other volunteering roles. Yet Lara cannot apply for citizenship because of this CSI requirement, and I just got my citizenship. So something is unfair there, where people who lead very similar lives and have similar levels of engagement in the community and similar contributions and areas of work have different results. One of them can get citizenship and one of them cannot, because of those requirements that very few people actually knew about before. Before I hand over to Pao, who will give an overview of the research on the cost of citizenship, I'll share the results of the first poll we did. So I hope everyone can see this. It's really split, but I see, I mean, 28% say I'm reluctantly considering applying, like quite a minority say I actually do not wish to become British. So the majority actually do consider, which is what we find as well in our Young European meetings and focus groups and other engagement activities we do. But there is this trend that people, EU citizens, reluctantly consider applying. And I really hope we can, you know, through this campaign and through more outreach and involvement and hosting this kind of cross-party conversations, to actually have a more positive vision that people can actually say, well, I don't reluctantly consider because I don't feel secure with my status. You know, actually, I want to live in a society where people feel secure with their settled status. That's why the 3 million are campaigning for security on settled status as well. But citizenship should be something positive, something that you do on, you know, as a pathway from settled status, but something that's not seen with fear or reluctance, but something that is actually seen with positivity and embraced. But before we get to that point, we need some changes in the system that we're campaigning for to make this pathway a bit smoother. Okay, so that's the first poll, and now I will invite Pau, who worked with other volunteers in the Young Europeans Network on some research around the cost of citizenship and also the dual nationality requirements, that restrictions that many countries have as well. But Pau will present today about the cost of citizenship to put this issue a bit more in perspective for you in a comparison, and we'll also get some questions on dual citizenship a bit later in the Q&A and the panel. And whilst Pau is speaking, I will launch one other poll, which is for everyone. So even if you're British, EU citizen, or non-EU citizen in the audience, what do you think is the main barrier for EU citizens applying for British citizenship? So Pau, over to you.
Hi, bear with me, I will be sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Good. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see
Yes,
it.
good. So this is a very short presentation, just some results about the research we've been carrying internally. There is a few people involved in this, I'm presenting it, but please consider this research as a joint effort for some people. So I will be speaking about costs and barriers for becoming British for EU citizens. So there is we'll be starting about economic cost comparison. It's a quite limited comparison. We are just only speaking about the application fee. There is other fees we'll not be considering. Then we'll be speaking about how can we compare this, because obviously different countries have different currencies and different cost of living and ability to spend money. So we will be comparing those with different comparison. We will take a second look about the economic cost, knowing how expensive these are in different countries. And then we'll be giving a very short overview about other barriers, because the cost is only one portion of this. There is many others which need to be considered. So you see here, this is the comparison between some countries. As you can see here, there is limited, it's a limited research, as I can say. This is not including other fees than the application fee. There is additional fees which also need to be considered, but are not here. The additional fees normally are a fraction of this application fee, but as you can see here, there's already a significant difference between some countries. The United Kingdom is the outstanding first most expensive country in terms of only applying for citizenship. Other countries which might have a similar cost of living, which is the USA, it's almost a third of this cost. Then you can see here the numbers. These are in pounds, and they are in exchange rate as of September 2020. You can see again, obviously, United Kingdom is much more expensive than many other countries who we would think are similar to us. Okay, in terms of comparing, as we can see here, the cost of life is different in different places. The United Kingdom has a cost of life really similar to the USA. Life is actually 30% more expensive in Norway than in the UK, for example, but is 29% cheaper in Spain than in the UK. As I said, life is roughly the same as expensive as in the US. But then in terms of being able to spend this money, there is other differences in here. Actually, if you have higher purchasing power, which it says in here, means that you are more able to spend more money than if you are lower. As I said before, the UK and the US have roughly the same cost of living, but UK workers or UK population is in average 37% less able to spend this money. So we need to account this when we are asking people for paying more than £1,000 to apply for citizenship. Knowing this, let's take a little look again at the cost of citizenship economically. This is a cost for adults again. We know that the life is actually 30% more expensive in Norway, but it's actually much less than a third the application fee than in the UK. Then, when we're speaking about children, we consider children those who are less than 18 years old. The differences are much higher, as you can see here. In the United Kingdom, it's £1,000 per person. In other countries, you pay nothing because you are considered in the same application as your parents or your guardians, as you can see in the case there as well. Other barriers which we are not accounting for, there is added applications fees, as you all know. There's a citizenship test that you need to pay for. There's an English test that you need to pay for. So these are added costs to this cost of application. Then, as we also said, we will be expanding on this as well. But there is countries of origin, especially in the EU, 6 out of 26 that we could account for, that have significant restrictions or directly do not allow dual citizenship. Then there is CSI, which is also a very specific issue. There's also absence requirements, which might become a bigger issue, especially in COVID times, which have locked out some people out of the UK who normally live in the UK but are EU citizens. And there is also hostile environment, which is also a significant barrier for some people. So our conclusion as a group of the young Europeans is that there is a need for a new vision on citizenship that is more accessible, affordable, and welcoming for the reasons that Lara said. So yeah, this is basically the ground that we are starting from. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pao. It's great to see all this in perspective, especially compared to other similar countries, similar to the UK. Before we start with the panel, I would like to share the results of the second poll. And this is interesting. It's unsurprising according to our conversations, but actually the cost is considered the main barrier, but the second and very close is the CSI issue, which is a specific thing, especially in the context of EU citizens at the moment, that we'll discuss a bit later today. So that's kind of confirms what we have heard from other meetings and webinars as well. So great, I will stop sharing this poll now and we will go to the panel discussion. So after we heard a bit about the campaign from Lara and a bit about this cost of citizenship in perspective from Pao, I'd really like to open a wider conversation on the different barriers, but also the positive solutions to the situation that we are in and how can we work together going forward. Just a reminder for everyone who is watching this on Zoom or on Facebook, you can add your comments, and if you are on Zoom, please use the Q&A function if you want to ask a question, and some of our volunteers will be able to answer your questions or point in the right direction, and I also pick the most popular questions for the live Q&A. So you can have like a like button on the questions on Zoom, so you can upvote the questions if you want them to be addressed in the panel live Q&A at the end as well. So now the main question for the panel, all panelists will have 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, ideally 5 minutes each to make their interventions, and then we'll open to Q&A around 7 p.m. So the main question here is how does the future of UK citizenship policy look like? What are the barriers? What are the solutions? What each panelist thinks about the issue or their organization works on, because some of the organizations represented today actually have been campaigning for a long time on issues such as the child citizenship fee or other specific issues in trying to change some of the citizenship policy that we have in the UK. So I will start with inviting Professor Christopher Bertham from University of Bristol. Christopher is an emeritus professor of social and political philosophy at the University of Bristol, and recently wrote quite a popular article in The Guardian about citizenship, the right to vote, and other issues. So I'll invite Christopher to have his intervention.
Hi, thank you, Alexandra. Okay, so I'm a political philosopher, and I guess I approach some of these issues in a slightly more abstract way. I realize these are kind of real kind of bread and butter issues for many of you, really very practical issues. But I think we also need to kind of think a bit about what kind of principles ought to be in play when it comes to allocating citizenship to people. And one place to start is the fact that the UK purports to be a democracy. Democracy is one of those kind of British values listed in the UK government's Prevent strategy. And a democracy is a society, or supposed to be a society, where the people who are subject to the laws get to make the laws. Yet we're getting into a situation in the UK and in quite a few other countries besides, where there are more and more people who are kind of living and working and growing up on the territory of the state, and those people don't have effective political rights because, say, they have the wrong nationality and they don't have easy access to citizenship rights, to political rights. So you've got to sort of pose the question, well, who should get these rights? And the government, the UK government, seems at least tacitly, with this talk of citizenship being a privilege and not a right, to think that there's some kind of exclusive club that people have to qualify for, to have kind of special merit to join. But that's really a kind of rather undemocratic principle. A more democratic way of looking at things, I would argue, is to say, okay, if somebody is kind of functionally a part of a society, if that's the society that's their home, that they're living in, that kind of shapes their options, that they're subject to the laws of a state, then people are entitled to a political say. They're entitled to political participation in that state. Now, I realize that there are kind of difficulties and barriers. So dual nationality laws, things like that. I think to some extent we need to separate out the question of citizenship from the question of political rights, because you can, after all, have political rights without having citizenship. In fact, Brexit means that some political rights have been taken away from EU citizens, but many countries around the world give political rights to permanent residents who are not citizens. So New Zealand, Chile, for example, give voting rights, including in national elections, to permanent residents. And though I think citizenship is kind of really important, and citizenship, after all, protects you from other harms and wrongs like deportation and so on, though citizenship is important, from the point of view of democracy, I think political rights are important, and we can, to some extent, finesse this dual nationality problem if we, alongside giving an easier route to citizenship and getting away with getting rid of these sort of difficult, expensive fees and so on, and tests and what have you, if alongside that, we also try to get embedded the principle that people who live and work and grow up and are educated and so on the territory get access to political rights, because they're just a part of the society, and part of what it means to be a democracy is to say that people who are subject to the laws get a say in making laws. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Yes, indeed, the 3 million were campaigning on both citizenship and political rights. Actually, one of our campaigns in 2021 will be on preserving local election voting rights for EU citizens in the UK. But, you know, often we discuss about those issues together. And I think in terms of EU citizens in the UK, a lot of people I meet say, well, I applied to become British because I want the right to vote. I want to have a say in politics. So in some people's minds, those issues come together, but there are ways that we could separate them. So thanks very much for that intervention. Moving on, next on the panel, we have Caitlin Boswell from JCWI, who is a project officer focusing specifically on EU citizens. So Caitlin, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. My name's Caitlin and I work at the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. We're a migrants' rights charity, and we've been campaigning for a better and fairer immigration system for over 50 years. So we believe that all migrants, regardless of their country of origin, should have affordable and accessible routes to citizenship if they should want it. Unfortunately, the citizenship system, as many others have kind of said today, is intentionally designed in a way that makes British citizenship extremely difficult to obtain when we look at in comparison to other countries, especially. The recent rule changes for EU citizens seeking citizenship around CSI are sadly not surprising or new. If you look at previous barriers to citizenship, previous existing barriers such as fees, the good character requirement, the life in the UK test, and issues around birthright citizenship, they're similarly unfair and arbitrary. This is how the system works, and it's part and parcel of how we exclude people from citizenship and voting rights. Lara kind of touched on this, which I was really glad to hear, but I just wanted to start by saying that I think it's really important that we place the conversation about citizenship within the context of the Home Office's hostile environment that surrounds it. For anyone who doesn't know, the hostile environment is a set of policies that was introduced by then Home Secretary Theresa May in 2012, designed to make life unlivable for people without the right papers. If people want British citizenship, as we've said, that should be their right and should always be their right. But no one should be made to feel like this is the only way to remain safe and secure from the government's harsh immigration policies. The Brexit vote and kind of constant changes in immigration rules and previously secure forms of status losing their permanence, so people with permanent residence having to apply under the EU settlement scheme, have led to a loss of trust in the Home Office and the government and a sense of fear and insecurity for many migrants. It's clear that the Home Office's hostile environment plays a central role, not just for undocumented migrants, but for all migrants, as well as British citizens of colour, as we've seen with the life-ruining mistakes made against the Windrush generation. That's why we need to make sure that we're working to dismantle this harmful system in any efforts to improve the citizenship and wider immigration system. So thinking briefly about barriers to citizenship, I think all of these have been mentioned, but I would say that the main barrier is the fees. It's the biggest barrier to citizenship, and the UK's route to naturalisation, as we've seen, is one of the most expensive in the world. The amount that the Home Office charges for visas and citizenship applications has been steadily rising at rates far higher than inflation for years, and can end up costing the applicant up to 10 times more than it costs the Home Office to process it. So the department is making a massive profit. EU citizens currently resident in the UK fortunately can access indefinite leave to remain for free through the EU settlement scheme, but for non-EU citizens and any EU citizens arriving as of January next year, the cost to routes of citizenship are exponentially higher and for many just completely unaffordable. The non-EU citizens have to pay thousands of pounds every 2.5 years to renew their visas, and often people who are eligible for citizenship might be unable to afford it and end up instead renewing their visa and remaining on a less secure form of status and spending more in the long run, or worse, being forced out of status altogether. This can end up costing a non-EU citizen around £8,000 and in some cases more. This is before you add any of the associated costs or the cost of any dependent children. As a result, the visa system disproportionately prices out people who are non-EU, on lower incomes, BAME, women, pricing them out of citizenship and too often out of status altogether and into the hostile environment. The second thing I wanted to touch on briefly, although I imagine that Tashi from We Belong will probably talk about this a bit more, is birthright citizenship. So being born in the UK doesn't automatically make you British. Many children who were born in the UK or have spent most of their lives here assume they're British, understandably, only to find out with devastating consequences that they don't have secure immigration status when it comes to applying for a job or to going to university. This has left many young people who feel and are British in every sense of the word, suddenly unable to continue their lives that they've been living and in some cases vulnerable to the harsh policies of the hostile environment. This is completely unacceptable. The third barrier I wanted to talk about is the Life in the UK test, which tests a person, in theory, tests a person's knowledge of the UK's values, history and laws. But in my opinion, trying to define what it means to be British and hanging the ability to secure citizenship on a test with right and wrong answers is not only absurd, but also deeply offensive and concerning. I'm British and have lived in the UK my whole life, and I can say with complete certainty that there's no way I would pass that test. In addition, the test and the associated handbook have been really widely criticised for their misleading portrayal of the UK's colonial past, role within the slave trade, the British Empire, and the lack of inclusion of British people of colour. This summer, over 180 historians of Britain and colonialism have actually called for its review. So as well as shaping how potential British citizens see the UK and its values, it excludes people with lower levels of English and those without time or resources to revise for this test. So that's mainly going to impact on people with lower incomes or without support networks. So what is the solution? Basically, it's not that complicated. We need affordable and accessible routes to citizenship for all migrants, regardless of their country of origin. It's not enough to pay lip service to levelling up, despite what the Home Secretary has said about the new immigration system being an equaliser of migrants. As it stands, EU citizens are soon to be brought down to the level and treatment of non-EU citizens. This is a real opportunity for change and reform of the citizenship system and wider immigration systems. Number one, finances should never be a barrier to anyone obtaining citizenship, and there should be fee waivers for anyone unable to pay. Number two, the Life in the UK test should be abolished, and there should be birthright citizenship for everyone. Thanks very much. Sorry if I went over.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. Like a lot to take in there, and like many solutions as well. So like part of this conversation is actually to discuss some solutions around those issues, especially around cost, but also other barriers. Actually, I want to read a comment before we move on to the next panelist. A comment from Barbara in the Q&A, which I found quite interesting. Barbara says, at least the fees should be divided into two parts: the administrative fee, so what it actually costs, and the second part paid only if a positive decision is made. One of the things that is interesting in some of my friends who applied, who are afraid, who want to apply for citizenship but are afraid of applying, they're saying, well, I actually don't know if I satisfy the requirements. I actually can't afford to pay this amount of money and then be rejected and then lose like over £1,000. So here's one thing to discuss, perhaps debate in the chat, and I'll read some more comments as we go through this webinar. So next, I think Caitlin already mentioned Tashi Tahir is the parliamentary officer for We Belong, and We Belong have been campaigning a lot on this issue of citizenship and on reducing the 10-year indefinite leave to remain route to a shorter route for non-EU citizens. So Tashi, over to you to tell us a bit more about your organization and your campaigning as well.
Thanks for the introduction, Alex. So as you mentioned, I'm Tashi and I'm the Parliamentary Officer of We Belong. And I'll mention briefly about what We Belong is before going into the barriers we face when we try to regularise our status as non-EU migrants. So We Belong was born out of a project called Let Us Learn. We've had a huge amount of impact since our conception. Basically, the current immigration system is failing young people who have grown up in the UK and have the right to stay and contribute to the country they consider home. We campaign for the rights of young people who have migrated to the UK to have equal access to their rights, just as their peers who have British citizenship have. And we have a vision for young migrants to be treated equally and fairly in the society, and to make citizenship and higher education also more accessible. Similarly, like the Young European Network, we are set up and ran entirely by and for young migrants who have lived experience of the immigration system. We work with young people that have moved here at young age, mostly children, but they have precarious status. Our main campaign is called Chasing Status, and it focuses on barriers young people face when attempting to regularize their status when they try to get on the path to citizenship. Lots of these barriers have already been mentioned throughout the panelists, and these barriers prevent them from fully integrating financially and socially within society, and this increases the risk of them falling back out of the system. A report by the Greater London Authority says that there are currently around 300,000 young people and children that have grown up with precarious status in the UK. And of course, after the EU settlement scheme closes, this number will just go up. Immigration rules are far too complex, and there are cuts to legal aids that mean that young people have to educate and re-educate themselves to keep up with these rules. And our biggest concern is one that has been mentioned, and it is the insurmountable costs to getting on this route to citizenship. Predominantly the young people that we work on the 10-year route to settlement. And over the last 6 years, our fees to citizenship have increased by 331%. So each 30 months we have to apply, it's just gone up this October, a fee of around £2,593. We have to do that 4 times. And then after that, we have to apply for indefinite leave to remain, which is after 10 years, which is around £2,300. And then a year after that, we can apply for British citizenship. So it is a long and drawn out process, and we're concerned that around 80% of these fees, as has been previously mentioned, are a profit to the Home Office, and they go back into funding our borders, something that we already contribute to through our taxes. The average UK resident doesn't even have £1,000 in savings, yet migrant families are expected to have this and more despite being in less well-paid jobs. The young people we work with are entering adulthood with immense financial hardship, and many are being driven into debt under this relentless pressure. So I'm one of these people on these 10-year routes, and I've spent all my formative years here. Made my friends here, my values have been shaped here, and some of the people at We Belong have been here since the age of 2. The UK being the only home we have and know. Our future is now uncertain because of these unaffordable rising fees that are pushing us out of legal status and we are being pushed out of the path of citizenship. If we cannot regularize our status and we fall out of this path because of the high fees, we will find ourselves unable to do basic things like rent property, access to loans, employment, social security, all these basic things that we take for granted. Without this status, there is a risk that this will be the generation of lost potential, and social integration will be hampered further. And then, of course, after the Brexit period, anyone in the EU who missed the cut-off period will be real worry that they will be facing the full force of this hostile environment as well. But I feel that there is hope. You know, our young people, like the European Network, are here to question the status quo and are unwilling to settle for unequal treatment. We are calling for a shorter and more affordable routes to settlement. We work with young people to create an open dialogue between them and policymakers to change the narrative and ensure that laws are not made without consulting the groups that are impacted most by them. We believe in the power of storytelling and lived experience to help drive the change and to reform our immigration system, something that the Young European Network also does already so well.
Thanks very much for that, Tash. And I think the Young Europeans Network campaign, when we started this campaign, discussing with Lara and all the other volunteers, we thought about, okay, what can we campaign to make citizenship, together with other organizations, fair for everyone, regardless of their nationality. And of course, this cost issue is something that is significant for all young people, regardless of whether you're from the EU or the EA or not. So thank you for your thoughts on that issue as well. Moving on the to the panel. We have next Sander Kadvala from British Future, director of British Future, and Sander has been working on a citizenship inquiry, so I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about what is the future of British citizenship in the UK from his perspective. So Sander, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak. Congratulations to you on becoming a British citizen, but also congratulations to you and Lara and Pau and everyone else involved on this campaign. I think it's a really timely and important campaign that you're launching, and I think it's a great moment to do it. And I think young Europeans are great voices to take this campaign forward at this moment. Nicholas talked about how many of us have a simple approach to citizenship. I'm one of those lucky people that had a simple approach to citizenship. I was born in a hospital in Yorkshire, so I was born British. Very simple. If you go back a generation in the Katwala family, you open up more of the issues that you're dealing with tonight. My father actually was also born British, 4,000 miles away in Baroda, India, because it was 1944. And so he became the citizen of an Indian republic between the ages of 3 and 4. But he came back to Britain in his 20s, having trained as a doctor. There was Commonwealth free movement just about at that time, so he could come. And he came to Britain, and he became British again much later. I think it was probably the 1990s. Partly as an Indian person in Britain, he had a British identity before he had British citizenship. I think the motive for my dad was it was quite difficult to get a visa to go to France on his Indian passport. The French embassy would have you there for hours and say, "You're going to stay, aren't you?" And he really didn't have the language skills to do that, being British. And so eventually he got a British passport. My mother was from Cork in Ireland. And so she came over, free movement with Ireland, probably just before Britain and Ireland entered the European Union. And she's never become British because as an Irish citizen, she has the right to vote in British general elections. Britain has never quite considered that Ireland ever became an independent country as such. And so it's a slightly different group among the Europeans. But there you actually have the pattern of citizenship in our society. Of the 8 million people born abroad, the people born outside Europe have often become British, half or more. The people from the European Union, especially the Irish at first, but other Europeans, did not take up British citizenship because we were in the European Union. People came as European citizens. Those were the terms. And now people are thinking again about British citizenship now because of Brexit. So it's an important moment. It's an important moment for this campaign. What I really like about the campaign is these are really complex issues, but you will win this campaign by keeping the argument simple. You know that the issues are complex, but first of all, there's a message that says we need a vision for citizenship. We haven't got one. The message is simple. Should it be welcoming? Should it be accessible? Does Britain want to say if people want to become British when they've lived here 5 or 6 years, we welcome it, we encourage it, and that's good for you and good for us? Because if you win that argument about the vision, we can get to all of the points about the detail and the cost and so on. And if we don't win the argument about the vision, then we won't get there. And this is a good moment, I think, to make that argument. I think the Brexit question, whether you regret it or you're used to it by now, it's finished for now. And so that we put that behind us and we say, what does Britain want to say to the people who have got settled status or applying for pre-settled status, to whom it's saying, feel welcome. We want you to feel at home here. This is fully a place that you are welcome. Does Britain also say, therefore, if you want to be citizens, we welcome and encourage that? That's the same message. It ought to be the message. So I think this message you have, that make it welcoming, make it accessible, make it affordable, is a very good, simple message, and it's good to make it. The other very positive thing about this campaign is, while I think young Europeans in particular are very positive messengers here, I think it's really clear in the way that you're making this campaign that you don't want special rights for yourselves and not to make progress for everybody else on the challenges that we belong face with birthright citizenship, on the challenge that non-EU nationals face. So you want a broader vision about what citizenship means in Britain. And I think a really important part of that argument is to say citizenship is special, It can be special, but you don't make it special by making it difficult. You don't make it special by making it inaccessible to people who aren't rich, but accessible to people who are rich. You make it special by making it special, by requiring people to have a commitment, to know what they're committing to feel the obligations as well as the rights of citizenship. So we can have rules, but we shouldn't have barriers and hurdles. And we're at a different moment in our history now with Brexit, where and the public don't know the difference, of course, between settled status and citizenship. They probably think everybody who's on settled status has got citizenship already. That's quite complicated if you're not, somebody directly affected by it. So it's an important thing to say is, why not, just to simplify it, why not say if you've got settled status, you're eligible for citizenship? That would make a lot of sense. There are rules on settled status around criminality and things like that, or people who don't have the eligibility for it. But if we've decided that you're here 5 years, you're a permanent resident of our country, should there be a whole different set of checks and tests about CSI and so on? Back to the start of the settled status scheme, about a third of people were not getting applications for permanent residence because of comprehensive sickness insurance, and so the answer was to not require it. And so the answer for citizenship is to say, if you've met the criteria for settled status, then you shouldn't have to wait another year before you're eligible to be a citizen. Be eligible for citizenship. It's good for you and it's good for Britain. So I think it's a great campaign if you have a simple message that says, why not make it welcoming, make it accessible. We're not insisting that people become British. If people want permanent status because of dual nationality rights, that's fine. But if you want it, it's good for you, it's good for us. And then you get to the argument about the cost. It'll be harder to win the argument about the cost. Those £1,000, the government's keen to have £1,000 from each of you. But actually, if we've decided there's a vision for integration, for inclusion, for the message that Britain wants to send, then making those decisions about costs are easier. So I think you should be confident in your voice. I think you should be saying, not this will be incredibly difficult, but you should be saying, why not? You said you want us to feel at home here. We want to feel at home here. This would make a difference. What do you think? Prime Minister, politicians, support us, say what you've said, and let's make it happen. So good luck with the campaign, but I think it's very timely.
Thank you very much, Sander. And exactly that question, like, why shouldn't Lara have citizenship if I got citizenship myself, despite having such similar lives and living in some similar places? So thanks very much, Sander. And I think there's an important point to remind everyone on this webinar about the pathway to citizenship with settled status, because I often get questions from young people, but EU citizens in general, who don't actually know that settled status is a pathway to citizenship. So if you have settled status, for most of us, we have to wait 12 months. So 12 months from the moment you get your decision letter, and then you could apply for naturalization as a British citizen. If you're married or in a civil partnership with a British citizen, you don't have to wait those extra 12 months. You can apply straight away after you got settled status. And there's more information online, and some of the volunteers could point you to some of those websites with information. But I think that's something the government should make clearer and actually encourage people that settled status is a pathway to citizenship, and not only put this in small print on page 3 of the decision letter on settled status. So thank you very much for that. Next, we have a perspective on, especially on child citizenship, because this is, of course, an issue that affects youth campaigning in general, but there are other type of challenges and more detailed challenges around child citizenship. And I see we have both Stuart McLachlan and Anita Hurl on the panel. I think, Stuart, you're supposed to speak, but feel free to both contribute if you want to in this discussion. So over to you. From Coram. They're both from Coram, and they campaign on child citizenship rights.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm part of, me and Anita are part of Coram and Coram Children's Legal Centre, which promotes and protects the rights of children in the UK and internationally. And our kind of work over this period, we've worked on citizenship for quite a long time, and we have a pro bono project that helps to register children born in the UK under the 10-year route. But we've also been doing a lot of work around the EU settlement scheme and looking at barriers to it for in particular separated children and vulnerable adults and families. And some of the things we've picked up also kind of relate to citizenship, and I think a lot of them come out of the work that we've done both in outreach and in kind of specific projects around working with children in care. And I think I get that some of this is going to be a bit more technical, etc. But I think the first thing we're often finding is a lack of understanding around when a child is British in the UK, and when they're automatically British, and that's already complicated. But it's specifically more complicated for EU citizens or children of EU citizens, because it can depend on the kind of, it's not always clear whether a parent is permanently resident, for example, at the time of birth or thereafter. And so that's our kind of first area. And we also kind of have an issue of potentially if the one of the parents isn't involved, for example, and is the British or settled partner, then it often can't be, or can be difficult to be proven that the child is British when they're born in the UK. And the other two is also that for children there are separate rights to adults. Not to get bogged down in too much detail, but there is as I said, that we do a pro bono project around 10 years. So if a child is born in the UK and is not British automatically, if they live their first 10 years of their life in the UK, they can register to be a British citizen either as a child or an adult. And there is also there is a discretionary route, which I don't think has been mentioned today, but it does apply to potentially to a lot of children who maybe aren't born in the UK but have lived in the UK for a long period of time, or meet specific criteria and a kind of guidance. It is all discretionary, so there's no kind of absolute rules. There are kind of guidance that the Home Office provides, but it does open up a kind of different route for children, particularly those who've lived a long time in the UK. And I think some of the barriers we've found, particularly working with, say, for children in care, is around, first of all, being able to prove that a child is British. Sometimes that is quite difficult to overcome. In relation to kind of making an EU settlement scheme application, it can sometimes be they don't have any documentation, or the parents, for example, if the child's in care, aren't able to provide that documentation. And then as well, there are sometimes suitability issues, and those relate not as much to EU settlement, they can do, but will also particularly relate if they wish to apply for citizenship at any period due to the good character requirement. And so we've found in relation to citizenship that even when someone gets settled status, there can be issues, as a number of the panelists have pointed out already, around good character, but also around potentially having to wait 12 months. But then there's also, I think, a lack of understanding around the routes that children may be able to go to, particularly when they're under 18, because the young person will lose a lot of those rights. When they turn 18, they're no longer able to apply under specific routes, and may have to go under the kind of general naturalization rules that people have been talking about. And apart from that, I think there is a kind of wider question, particularly for children in care, is around kind of when you're making decisions about nationality and identity, these are quite big picture issues. And in some cases, you're looking at local authorities making quite profound decisions about a child's identity at potentially an age where a child doesn't have capacity to kind of contribute, or where their views will be taken into account, but are not necessarily definitive. And I think that's somewhere where we've seen with local authorities or people not used to these kind of issues having to grapple with quite profound issues around identity, and about balancing the idea of, whether you may lose citizenship as a result of applying for British citizenship. And I guess the last thing would be around evidence for a lot of children for trying to identify kind of lawful residence. I think we've talked about kind of exercising treaty rights and what that means in terms of kind of lawful residence for children. And there's actually been some interesting case law around what constitutes lawful residence for EU citizens. And actually there's been an upper tribunal decision that kind of goes into whether actually a child can be exercising treaty rights or be expected to exercise treaty rights in the same way you would an adult, when you're thinking about In that case, it was around deportation and immigration, but you could also apply that to kind of citizenship applications as well. And I think I'll just kind of stop there because I know time's kind of running out, but I'm happy to take any questions later on.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Yes, indeed, we're a bit over time with the panel, but I think we have a lot to think about. And in the case of child citizenship, I think it's very interesting that we have about, I read at least 400,000, I think, EU children born to EU parents in the UK. So in the next years, we can see more and more questions around the citizenship of EU children. And I personally get a lot of confused messages from parents asking whether their child is actually born British or not. And child citizenship law is perhaps one of the most complex areas in terms of immigration. So thanks very much for that intervention. Finally, on the panel, before we go into the Q&A, and I see the volunteers have been very busy answering over 30 questions in the Q&A. I will select a few that are the most popular questions for all the panel. But before we go into that Q&A, I would like to hear a more political perspective from Kenneth Morris, who is the chair of the group called Conservative Friends of Romania. Kenneth, what is your opinion on the issue and the political perspective on the issue at the moment?
Hello there. Yeah, so obviously I suppose you saved the not so much the best till last, but the more controversial until last as the Conservative with a big C. Yeah. So as the Conservative Friends of Romania chair, my particular focus is the liaison between the Romanian diaspora community and the Conservative Party on the basis of political participation, really. So I think it links in. What I really want to do, though, is be more general and perhaps give some of the views of the Conservative voter. So your sort of typical Conservative voter is going to be at the moment a pro-Brexit, largely individual, probably a British citizen. I don't know that, but the idea is going to be maybe a little different flavour to what we've heard so far. So I think it's good to understand where sort of we're coming from, you know, where this large bulk of the electorate is coming from in their thoughts. So I mean, we've already outlined. I mean, better speakers than I've outlined these principles regarding citizenship. So I'll really go through how we see it and maybe how I see it in particular. So we've got sort of a twofold situation for the future of citizenship. We've got the citizens who are going to become citizens, rather people who are already here, the EU citizens, for example, in this case. And then we've got those in the future, people who are going to come into the country who aren't here right now. I think it's a very different situation there. That's tied to the immigration policy from a political angle very significantly. So the main benefit for those here, of course, as we discussed, is stability, political participation. Those two branches, you can split stability in relation to economic position, political participation, the ability to engage, stand in elections, vote in all elections, especially the general elections, and make long-term plans to stay here. And so I think where it gets sort of interesting from a Conservative angle is for the future, our policy has to be tied to the immigration goals of the party. And so the goal presently, as everyone knows, is to reduce the total net immigration figures. That's what we've been saying for a long time, for many years. And I'm just putting that out there in case anyone didn't know that's what the Tories are thinking about, you know. So, and as this is the case, we've seen, and we've mentioned a lot of the policies. I suppose the most recent one is the points-based system. And I think that sort of is a good example of the flavour where people are coming from, where Conservatives are coming from in their views of how immigration should look in the future, and thus citizenship, because the immigrants of the future are the people who are going to be looked to become citizens, similar position to the people we have in the UK at the moment. So the mantra, as much as it might be it's a hard thing to use, is sort of a quality over quantity approach. I use that loosely, of course, because the issue is we're really defining things by economic contribution, wages, that sort of thing. Whether that's a just example of how people might be considered quality citizens is perhaps a separate debate. But certainly, I think there's an idea that if you're going to reduce numbers, trying to reduce the unskilled labour aspect of that is the easiest political solution to that particular problem, which is that's politics for you. But certainly as we're going forward, you get these other aspects such as not just exceptional skills. We've got already systems for businessmen, people who are the high net worth individuals. This is the angle people are coming from. It does give you an idea that a lot of people see citizenship as very much an economic thing, but a sort of a chance for people to prosper. There is an idea. The British public and British people do see that this country is a great opportunity. People come here for a reason. They don't come here for the weather. They come here for the various opportunities you can have being in Britain, which is different. Of course, we have a similar cost of living to other countries, but there's a big difference between Britain and France and the USA and all these things. You pick Britain for a reason, and one of those reasons, which is perhaps easier to sort of grasp, is the way of doing business, those sort of things. So I think that the economic side is where it's the easiest way to argue the point. However, at the same time, there's a great political feeling in the UK. Of course, we've had Brexit, we've had a number of Conservative victories, of course, is that, the UK has, the perspective is that the UK has watered down the aspects of its citizenship and immigration policy. It's made it people see it as too easy to come here, too easy to become a citizen even, although they might not explain it that way. This is the sort of rhetoric, at least, and perhaps the experience people perceive. And so with that being the case, we have to look at what are the arguments that one would employ. And the difference is perhaps it's a British thing. I only speak as an Englishman, but in England or in Britain, we see citizenship as a privilege, not sort of a self-evident inalienable right. It's not the idea of the Enlightenment ideal, if you will. Citizenship here is seen as this great privilege. It's very hard to define at first, especially for the average person. Like it was, Nicola said at the start, it's something maybe we don't even think about it, until it comes to it. But it's certainly seen as a privilege, and when it's seen as a privilege, our approach to speaking about a lot of people becoming citizens has to take into account how people also see citizenship itself. And one of the political risks is that any sort of talk about making citizenship easier goes hand in hand with thoughts of making immigration easier. The two sort of go hand in hand in one's mind. And so because, for example, a Conservative government has its promises, the tens of thousands net immigration figure that's been around for a while, that sort of thing, then we have to be very careful that we don't give the wrong impression that this is some sort of backdoor way of not fulfilling those promises. Certainly, a lot of it is to do with sort of the rhetorical angle as opposed to the legal, I think, for convincing people. For example, if you speak to people about someone who's been here for 20 or 30 years or 40 years in the UK, they're much more likely to say, yeah, maybe, of course they should be able to become citizens, and probably quite easily. This is sort of accepted as a matter of fairness. It's just considered that way, as opposed to the more legalistic view, which I'll get onto in a moment, which I think is perhaps the real cream of the issue. The other thing I should say is that obviously our main focus here is perhaps the EU citizens in the UK. Unfortunately, you might look at it that way, that the longer these things go on, the more years pass and the more people who are more likely to come into the right sort of criteria to become citizens. So I think the issue is decreasing year by year, if you can put it that way, or 5 years by 5 years, if you want to put it another. And so that's sort of the brief summation. But what I would say here is that the issue for convincing is that it's got to be persuasion. We've got to come from an angle of persuasion and not so much a matter of aggression, to use the term very lightly. So what I mean by that is from a sort of maybe theoretical view, because obviously I think that a lot of EU citizens might vote Conservative, for example, were they to become citizens. But the fact of it is how things have been constructed. There is a great worry, I think, amongst a lot of people, that the EU citizens, to use it lightly, are almost intrinsically anti-conservative. Because obviously Conservatives are the party of Brexit, the party that's going to deliver Brexit. And thinking about lobbying or speaking to politicians, it's going to be very hard to convince a political party to suddenly bring hundreds of thousands or millions of voters into the electorate who are, when apparently you're being told they will vote against you, they will punish you, they have a grudge against you, they're going to kick you out. And certainly you can change a government with 3 million very politically motivated and educated individuals, in the right constituencies. So you see, these are the worries when we discuss these things from a conservative angle, or as they would be from any government who's got the job of delivering something like Brexit. You don't want to bring millions of hostile voters, or you don't want to sell it that way, and you certainly don't want it to come across that way. So I think it's a way of persuasion over enforcement, because don't forget that a lot of the arguments around Brexit are to do with, for example, the EU especially as this sort of institution enforcing laws on people. And if you suddenly go up to British people and say, well, we want to use the law to, again, enforce something that you might perceive as affecting you negatively in some way, it doesn't come across, I don't think, as the best approach. I'm not saying, as an approach taken by particular people or whatever, but I think that's certainly the perspective from this side of the fence, if you know what I mean. I think a good comparison to highlight that point is the issue. We're talking about Hong Kong at the moment, just briefly, about giving sort of citizenship, bringing a lot of Hong Kongers over, and is looking after them, that sort of thing. You don't really hear much complaint, about that, because people sort of think, well, people in Hong Kong, they're basically British, aren't they? They're just the same as us almost in almost every way. So there's no real bone of contention there. But there's clearly, over the past few years, especially since perhaps the Brexit vote and around there, been established some sort of two-tier citizenship. In other words, it's the old thing of, even if someone were to become a citizen, are they really the same kind of citizen as a Brit would be? I mean, I'm not going to say, if we go to war with France, would the Frenchman become a British citizen, fight against France? But it's that sort of thing on a smaller level. It's the idea, are we going to have, if we politicize the matter too much, are we going to have that issue? Are we going to have sort of people who are citizens, but they're not really the same sort of citizen as you or I? And then we get this weird kind of, as a very British unspoken issue of these sort of various groups operating in different ways. And I think these are the things, maybe it's more theoretical, but it's certainly something to consider as we're seeking to move on from the Brexit discussion. That's the thing. Citizenship should be a positive thing. It shouldn't just be negative. We want to, the Conservative Party is going to get Brexit done. Now we want to move on to new debates, new discussions, new engagement. And I think there's a massive positive contribution that can come from all those EU citizens who seek to become citizens of the UK. And so certainly we need to look at it from an angle of, we don't want to have in 5 years' time the issues of Brexit now affecting future general elections when they're not necessarily the right issues to vote upon. If we become too politicized over this issue. And so I think that's sort of as positive as I can put it there. But I think it's important to see if we're shaping the future. We've got to see who is shaping the future, and what are the views of these different people. So that's the angle I would say of the average Conservative voter and perhaps Conservative MP. And yes, so I hope that's outlined perhaps a different flavour. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. I think there's a longer debate to have than a short panel, maybe like a separate event just speaking about conservative approaches on this issue. So thanks very much for that intervention. I'll have a question. It's actually linked to something that both you and Sander, I think, can comment on. So maybe a question for Sander from the audience. Is citizenship generally regarded as a tool for integration or a reward for being integrated? So what is the balance of that issue around that relation between citizenship and integration? So maybe Sander, if you want to comment on that, and then we can maybe have other comments from the panel, then another question, and we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm trying to get as many questions as possible. So please do keep your answers brief in the Q&A. Thank you.
I think it's a very good question, but the answer is that different people see it in different ways, really. And some British people would have a very pro-rights view. Some people would have a very pro-integration view. Some people would have it's a special privilege and we want to see people being very proud to get it kind of view. So the trick of a campaign like this is to speak to all of those views in an effective way, to build a consensus rather than choosing one view. That's why it's so useful to hear Kenneth's view, really, from the Conservative side, because this campaign will be very, very popular with everybody who doesn't hold power in this country, including the Scottish government or the government in Scotland and the London mayor, and office holders, but who don't own the Home Office, but you're going to have to convince Conservatives as well as Labour and Liberal Democrat and SNP people. So getting the arguments right for all of those political tribes is very important. It's one reason British Future has created a citizenship inquiry that's going to report, where Alberto Costa, a Conservative MP, is chairing a group that has the JCWI chief executive on it, but it also has Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, on it, and we can build a consensus among those views about what's right on citizenship that perhaps helps to answer some of the questions that Kenneth is telling us will come up here. I mean, this isn't an argument about the immigration policy. People can make their decisions about the points-based system, and then if you've made those decisions 5 years later, if someone's lived in Britain and wants to commit to Britain and has been invited in on a visa, can they become citizens too? And here the Conservative Party has been changing its policy helpfully. Theresa May's policy was to break the link between migration and settlement, so it was harder, there were higher salary levels. Now the salary levels are quietly being brought into line to the visa salary level. So the signal there is, if we let you in, if we thought you were right under the point system, you've lived here 5 or 6 years, then let's do it. And so numbers aren't always trumps. The Conservatives want to get the numbers down, but they make an exception for Hong Kong. They want to get the numbers down, but all of the EU nationals who are here must be welcome. So I think we should listen very carefully to Kenneth's points and find a way that reassures people with those views that they can have a managed immigration system that they want, but that they can join this call for citizenship and integration for the people who've been here 5 or 6 years and want to commit full-time their families' lives to Britain.
Thank you very much, Sander. Does anyone else from the panel want to comment on this issue, those questions that we have around integration? How does citizenship policies sit within that debate? Anyone else on that? Okay, we have a lot of questions actually about the CSI requirement and very technical legal questions. So I would like to just invite for a couple of minutes my colleague Luke Piper, who is the legal expert in the 3 million, to give a very short overview perhaps on some of those questions that we have seen in the chat, and then I'll move into a more discussion question before ending the session.
Thanks, Alex. Very interesting discussions this evening. This is an issue that is obviously something that's touched on by lots of people in the chat, and it's not just the fees, it's legal policy that's created by Parliament, and specifically on this issue, government. And it all centres around this issue of people having to have had comprehensive sickness insurance when they were self-sufficient, or in the case of young people, particularly students. Now, at the moment, there is still a bit of a question mark around the CSI issue, and I've been asked to sort of contribute where things are at the moment in terms of that discussion, legally speaking. And a court in Northern Ireland has referred to the European Court of Justice the question of whether or not essentially access to the NHS is equivalent to comprehensive sickness insurance. And this would probably deal with quite a lot of the issues that are arising from a lot of experience that people have been having. It's a complicated issue. I'm not going to go into too much, but the fact of the matter is that there is a case that potentially will hopefully draw a line in the sand on this matter once and for all. But fundamentally, for now, at the moment, those who are looking to naturalise to become British citizens and are concerned about or rub up against the CSI requirement, it's not the end of the story, because the UK government have said that if you didn't have CSI, then in certain cases they will exercise their discretion and will say, we will forget about that blip, that point in time when you didn't have it, when you didn't know that you needed to have it, more importantly. And they will say that they'll exercise their discretion. The problem is we don't really understand the parameters of that discretion, so what that discretion looks like. Is it just that you didn't have it? There are other extra things that you need to show. So we're asking the government to be a lot more clear on this point. And I think one of the barriers to citizenship isn't just administrative hurdles, it isn't just cost, it's also good law and clear instructions as to how you can become a citizen. And a lot of the anxieties that EU citizens feel aren't just the issues in terms of cost, but it is that lack of certainty. And all of these questions that are in here and all of this sort of discussion that's going on is entirely centered on that. So we need the government to give us a very clear answer and a clear policy as to how people can navigate this issue so they can make that vital decision with such an investment in becoming a British citizen. I hope that helps, Alex.
Yes, thank you very much, Luke. And some of the volunteers have been pointing out some links and some other materials in the Q&A, but if you haven't had an answer to your question, the volunteers also posted our Young Europeans email address, so we'll try to signpost you to an organization if you are in that situation. But a lot of the questions in the chat and the Q&A actually require legal advice, and the 3 million is not a legal advice organization, so we can't actually offer advice on individual cases, but we could recommend other organizations where you could get such advice. So thanks very much, Luke, for that overview of the CSI issue, which is one of the main barriers people speak about. I will just have one more question that came up a few times in the Q&A and also previous conversations, opening it up to all the panelists, whoever wants to respond to that. And then I will have to end in a few minutes because we're like running over time. But this is the question. This is quite a controversial question. We have different views on this. Is settled status safe enough to keep living in the UK? Who would like to get started on that debate? Just jump in the debate, either yes or no, or maybe, or it's complicated. Maybe, I don't know, Caitlin or Nicholas, you have your hand up. And Caitlin after.
I think, I mean, Luke can come in on the legality. I think for most people, they can continue their lives with settled status and for as long as they want, as long as they maintain the status. I think for most people, and that's sort of the promise that was the promise that was made, really. But there's all the exceptions to the most people, which is worrying, and I think that it's not going to be the same rise as we had when Britain was part of the EU. It feels different. It will have a different quality to it, and I think possibly when we look back in a couple of years' time at this situation, we'll be in a country that be much more within a national context. And I think that this call, we're the pioneers in that debate on citizenship, because I think it will really become much more acute, and it will not be about being safe, but about, okay, as an individual, do I want my future to be in the country where I can't vote, or do I want my future maybe elsewhere? And so I think it's safe enough for most people, but I think it's maybe not, it won't necessarily be the questions in 2 years' time.
Thanks, Nicholas. Caitlin, would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think, I agree with most of what Nicholas said. I would also add that I guess in theory and on paper, settled status should be enough to be safe in the UK, and you get most of your rights, as you said, other than kind of voting rights. But there's an issue of trust that the government has really eroded, and an issue that for a lot of EU citizens who previously had permanent residence, like I've spoken to a lot of EU citizens who have said to me, I had permanent residence, that's supposed to be permanent, and now I'm being told that doesn't stand for anything. I could become undocumented if I didn't apply to the EU settlement scheme. So what's the difference with settled status? And that's what people have said to us, and that's what people are worried about. So I can completely see why people might not feel safe with settled status, despite the fact that they've been told that it is indefinite and it is permanent. So there's an issue of trust that I would place the blame on the Home Office there with that. But we're yet to see how safe and secure it will be. But I really hope that it is permanent, as we've been promised that it should be.
Thanks, Caitlin. Anyone else wants to comment on this issue?
Can I say something, just as a EU citizen as well, just building on what Caitlin said? I think it's an issue as well of what we feel, I'd say, as ever-changing rules. And it's very related to what some panelists said here, is okay, these rules are these ones today, I know that, which are they going to be in 2 years' time? That's a simple question. And that's I think is a fair question. I have this question as well myself. Many people will have that. And that's why we might feel this question of, is settled status enough? Because we don't know. We feel like rules are changing constantly in this issue. So that's why we maybe not feel that secure about this. That's it.
Thanks, Pau. Yes, I think that's one of the main issues I see a lot in, I mean, I work out to the Romanian community, but also like with, other EU citizens, just some people are just not informed on the issues. And partly why it's difficult to inform people is because the rules are changing so quickly and are implemented so quickly that by the time that you get to inform on one aspect of immigration policy, you already have a new change that you need to inform people about. So having a more strong and stable system, I would say, with fewer changes would be, to use someone's phrase, would be a bit better, to make people also have more confidence that once you get something, like once you get this permanent residency card, people thought, okay, I've done my bit, but now they're told, well, you have to exchange it for settled status because it won't be valid anymore because it was under EU law and not under UK law. So it creates a lot of confusion. Okay, thanks everyone for this discussion. I think we need to organize another debate on some of the more specific aspects and with more people, because we always run out of time in the Q&A. We had about over 50 questions in the live Q&A on Zoom with a lot of volunteers responding, and we had many, many other comments on Facebook where some of our volunteers have been responding as well. Just to answer one question that appeared here, the recording will be available. So on the 3 Million's Facebook page, if the volunteers can put this page on the chat, there will be a link where the live stream was, so you can rewatch this session or share it with your friends afterwards. And we'll also send next week a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the Zoom webinar with two different links. And one will be a paper with those issues around the cost of citizenship, how much it costs and how basically Pau's research in a paper format. And then one other paper on dual citizenship and the restrictions. So if you're someone who thinks, well, I'm from this country, I'm not actually sure if I can have dual nationality, we'll have this paper detailing all the countries that accept dual citizenship and all countries that have restrictions and what are those restrictions as well. So you can be more informed on those issues and share it with your friends as well. So thank you so much for everyone on the panel. It has been a good discussion with so many different angles of the debate. And this, I hope, is the start of speaking about this issue, because as a lot of the volunteers have said, including some of the people in the video, what is missing is actually building this vision, this collective cross-party vision, that we can work on certain things that we agree on. Obviously, we won't agree on everything on this panel or, on any panel on this issue of citizenship, but we have to ask, what can we work on together to achieve changes that are positive for the country, positive for young people, but EU citizens in general as well, and take this issue forward and actually persuade the government to have a vision on this issue, not only a set of rules and requirements that people need to conform to. So finally, I would like to thank as well, apart from the panelists, my colleagues, Luke, Nicolas, as well, all the volunteers in the chat. So I know Jay, Maria, Shukri, Antonia were in the background, very busy answering the questions. Obviously, Pau and Lara, who presented today. I would also like to thank Nele and Jim, who worked on the citizenship cost presentation with Pau as well. This was really a team effort with a lot of volunteers doing lots of bits and pieces, and other people who have been involved in the videos and other kind of parts of the campaign. And also I'd like to thank Unbound Philanthropy, who is funding my position in the 3 million. It enables me to have some time to actually organize some of the volunteer network and the events on young Europeans. So what happens next? The follow-up email with the 2 briefing papers next week. Do subscribe to the 3 million newsletter if you're not subscribed already, so you can get updates, including updates from the young Europeans. We tend to do a newsletter when we have events like this one. We did a newsletter announcing what we do and some of our activities. If you're a young European person, you can also volunteer for the Young Europeans Network. Our volunteers should have put this in the chat. as well. So yes, check out our page, stay in touch, and this will be just the first event. So we'll organize different events in this campaign. So we'll have an event on specifically on dual citizenship in a few months' time. We'll have perhaps something that has different speakers with different angles in the debate and other activities you can get involved in as EU citizens or as British citizens or as any citizens who are interested in this issue. So thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see each other shortly in other citizenship events. Goodbye.